Good afternoon, everyone. Lisa Laker with another tutorial. Today I'm doing a sunflower. The colors that we're going to use are transparent orange, indigo, cadmium yellow, lemon, cadmium yellow, perylene green, and then we're going to finish it off with Winsor Newton's Designer's Gouache. And then the brushes I'm using are a number 12 round Princeton and a number 4 Princeton Neptune. So we're going to start off with wetting my brush, and then I'm going to make a little puddle in my palette here. And I do that just by dipping into the water and then squeegeeing it off onto the side. And then I'm going to mix the cadmium lemon. And these are all dry, that's why I'm digging my brush in. And the cadmium yellow. Until I get a yellow about like that. Now you could go buy these colors, or buy this specific color, and it would prevent you from having to mix it. But these are colors that I already have, and I enjoy mixing them. So I'm just using what I have and making the colors I want out of my resources. Okay. So if your color is too light, you have too much water, and what you could do is you could sop some of that up with a paper towel and add more color into it, but I'm happy with the consistency there. So I'm going to start by painting all of the petals. Well, you can see that I have it pre-drawn. I'm going to erase some of these lines. So that I can still see them, but not real dark. And the reason I do this is because once you paint over pencil, you can't erase them after that. Okay, now I'm going to take my brush in, and the number 4 or the number 12 Princeton has a pretty good point to it. So you can get pretty precise with the shape of the petals. So what I like to do is outline about 6 or 7 of them. And I'm a fast painter, so I've been doing this for about 25 years. And then I like to go back in and pull that color in. You don't want any puddles on your paper. And this is taped down to cardboard, so I can flip it around. Watercolor paper is cotton, and like anything, any paper, if you get it wet, it starts to distort. That's why you tape the paper first. I also prefer taping it to cardboard because at that point I can lift up and move the color around the way I want, and I'll show you that when we do the background. Okay. Now while this is still wet, I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of orange to some of the shadows. So I'm going to put it right into the color that I already have, and I don't want a whole lot, but I just like to get a little bit of depth to the color. If you look at an actual sunflower, you would see probably a million different shades of yellow and orange in it. So I'm gonna, and this is still wet, so it's gonna bleed into each other, but I'm just gonna randomly do some marks, some shadows. This one's behind, that leaf's behind, or the petal, sorry, not leaf. That petal's behind. This one goes behind. That one does too. And then just some lines. If you're new, You'll want to test the colors before you throw them on, because sometimes it takes a while to get the consistency right, and you definitely don't want to make it completely soaked. Okay, so the next I'm going to go ahead and do a green for the stem and the petals. And again, I'm just getting my brush wet. I'm squeegeeing a little bit off. It's okay that it's yellow. And I'm using the perylene green. So you can see how dark that is. And then I'm going to mix some of the brighter yellow in with it. Okay. And same thing, just going to kind of outline it very lightly. The number 12 brush holds a lot of water, so sometimes I can dip it in and get an entire picture painted with just carrying the water from one place to the other. Like right now I'm going to soak a little bit of this up because it went on pretty thick, and put more over here. A tip I like is I keep a towel with me, and you could always blot too. Blot and soak it up. And if you soak up too much water and the leaves look white, then you've got too much water in the color that you made. It could also be the paper that you're using. If you don't get a thick paper or a porous paper, the color will sit on top. And then I'm going to do the same with the stem. I'm still using the same brush because, again, that tip is just so fine. Okay. And then I'm also going to go into this circle right here, into the center of the pistil. And I'm going to let that dry. Okay, then next we're going to go in with this oranger color. And I'm going to mix that in just to a corner of my yellowish orange mixture that I have already. And I'm going to do this outer ring here. And then I've got this little kind of crescent moon shape. I'm going to avoid that. The trick with white is to not paint the area. So if you want something in your paintings to be white, it's best to avoid the area. Although we're going to add some of that gouache when it's all finished, just to kind of tint it and to add some specks to the other areas of the sunflower as well. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead while that's drying and work on the background. With this, I'm going to get clean water, and I'm going to use what's called a wet on wet technique. So I've got my brush wet, I've squeegeed it on the side so it's not soaking, and then I'm just going to take my brush into the right up next to some of those petals, very close but not touching. And then I'm going to push my brush down and drag out, and that kind of fades the water a little bit. And then I'm going to do it in a couple other areas too. So we'll do one down here. And always keep the point of the brush toward the petal. So turn your paper so that it works for you. And then push down slightly. And the further down, the less water's coming out. Although I do have a couple puddles there, I'm fine with that. And one more spot we'll do right up in here. And you can always add more when you're finished to balance it, so don't feel like you're limited there. And then I'm going to mix the dark blue or the indigo in with some of the water, just a drop or two of water. The more water you add, the lighter the color will be. And then just drop into those wet areas. And the water is going, or the color is going to stay right where the water is. And then I'm going to just lift it up a little bit and let the water carry the color. Now rinsing my brush, blotted it twice. When I say blotting, lightly pushing on the rag. These brushes are made to hold water. I still have too much in it. So if you put your brush straight from the cup to your paper, you're going to get your paper way too saturated. And then again, just as you push down and drag out, you're really painting with this very base part of your brush, which doesn't have much in it. And it helps you give that faded look. It also picks up on some of the texture of the paper. Now I tend to like a little bit more drama than what I have here, so I'm going to go straight into the indigo. My paper is still wet, and just drop up close to the flower more water. If the paper was dry, if this took too long, I would want to re-wet the paper. You can do just use your brush to push it back around. I've got too much water, so I'm soaking it up again. And you are not limited to the colors that I'm using. I just taught this class earlier today, and some of the ladies used this aqua color in with the blue as well, and that turned out very, very pretty. And then the other night I also taught this class, and I had one of the artists in there used some hot pink in with it. Kind of indicating a sunset, and that same person also put a little bit of hot pink into their yellow instead of the orange, so it looked kind of like the sun was reflecting off of the flower. So don't be scared to get creative. Blot that puddle off. This last section. Again, just drag out with the side. Okay. And now we're going to go back in, and I'm going to stipple into the pistils to give it that texture. I don't know if you can see it very closely here. But that is done through stippling, which is just taking your small brush and dipping it into the paint and then dotting it. So we're going to start with the black. And what I'm doing here, instead of mixing a puddle into my palette center, is I'm just going to add the drops, add a drop to the black. And again, all of these paints are hard. They've been on this palette for weeks, maybe even months. So the orange is still a little bit wet, so it's going to carry a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dry it to show you the difference. Okay, so now that it's dry, I can show you what it does when. See how it stays right where I'm painting it. And what I'm doing is I'm just going counterclockwise And I'm doing about four small dots, going like 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And just keep going around the entire sunflower. That way. It's going to look pretty forced, I guess would be the word, for a while, but we're going to soften that up by adding more layers of color. So don't be alarmed if you don't like how it's turning out. It is going to look very close to this when you're finished. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same part inside the center seated area where you saw I had a crescent moon here. And I also had one drawn right up here. And again, this is just, the black is just where there's shadows. I like a lot of drama and a lot of contrast with my paints. If you don't, you could also just put on a couple more layers of green and keep your green as undiluted as you can. Okay, so while that's drying, I want to pull some of this black into the petals. So any of the petals that are behind, again, where we kind of added orange, we're just going to pull some of the black into those areas as if it's shadowy. Now I've got the sun coming from this direction, so we're going to have more shadows here on this side. Do not use the black directly into the petal. If it's too dry to drag like mine is, add a little bit more to the outside and then drag from that. Otherwise it'll just get it'll get way too dark. And you can go all the way out toward the end too. I recommend rinse your brush and pull. That way it's not like you colored it with a crayon. And then add just a little bit of orange and let that black carry the orange. And then I keep blotting my brush and I forget to tell you, but then you can drag some of that out to the end again. So again, since the sun's coming from this direction up here, this is going to be my darkest area. And then we're going to have, it's going to slowly fade back. So we're not going to go as deep up here. Again, I'm just adding a few black dots in there. Rinse my brush, blot it twice, and then go ahead and drag some of that out. And if you want to add a little bit of orange while you go, depending on how experienced you are, if you're a beginner, I would just work on one color at a time and one section at a time, because I know when you're learning, you tend to paint a lot slower. As the paint dries, then you don't have as much time to work with it and move it. So work on smaller sections if you're new. Just add a little more orange into there and blot some of that up. Okay. want to go just a little more black in there. So again, you add it to here, not directly to your painting. Rinse, and then pull that out. There we go. Okay. And then just continue working up and around. Okay, so up in here I switched from black to, I used more orange for the shadows that I was pulling off, and then I switched back to the cadmium yellow to pull the veins out. So I didn't mix the cadmium yellow with the lemon yellow in those. That way it showed a little bit darker, but that's because the where the sun's hitting and casting shadows is mainly down here. So I didn't want it as dark and in depth as what that is down there. So now I'm just pulling lines from the texture of the petals down to give it that soft look or more realistic look. And then you can switch back to the more orange and with a little bit of black if you wish down toward the bottom. And now I'm just stippling some of that black, a little bit of the black shadows and textures up into the flower. Okay, now we're going to go back in with the black, and we're going to work the black and orange together to get rid of that real stark line. So you're going to start the same way by stippling all the way around it again, and this will just increase the depth of the black on there. Again, a little bit thicker down here. And this can be done a little bit quicker than last time too. Okay. And then we're going to mix some black in with the orange that's on the palette. And I'm going to test it on the paper. And do just a little bit more orange. Actually, I'm just going to mix that whole puddle. Yeah, there we go. So it should be right in the middle. And just add that right to the outside of the black. And that's going to soften that and carry it out a little bit. And now we're going to go straight into the orange, mix it with a little bit of that yellow, the cadmium. And now you're going to go right into, whoop, a little too much water on my brush. I'm going to go right into the edge of what we just did. And that's going to start to push that color around. And get some texture here, just keep stippling. I know it takes a while, but it's worth it in my opinion. And you can get up into the green, that is completely fine. And if like up in here it didn't fade as much as I wanted, so I'm just going to go very lightly. Make sure your brush is as dry as possible and circle a little bit back in there. That way it fades out just about like that. And now we're going to do the same with the green. I'm going to add a little bit more color to this, just to a corner of it. So that it's a little bit richer. There we go. I'm going to add a little aqua to it too. There we go. Okay, now we're going to let that dry. Now you can go back in and stipple as many layers of color. We're going to do one more layer in a little bit after we finish working on some details down here when we do this. But really you can go as deep as you want with the color there. So now we're going to, with the petals down here, we're just going to add a few shadows. So I'm wetting the paper. Maybe as if this leaf is bent up, maybe up here. And we're just going to add a little bit of blue to the green mixture that we had already mixed, or indigo. When I say blue, I mean indigo. And I'm just dropping the color in. Again, the water will carry it. Still using the number 4 brush. And then I'm also going to color in that little stem. And right up underneath that petal, we want to add a shadow as well. And then I'm going to pull the shadow all the way down the side of the flower. Just add a little bit more texture. I'm going to add paint and then blot it up. Same with down here. Oh, that's a lot of blue. That's okay though. Okay, I just rinsed my brush and I blotted it a few times. And I'm just going to spread some of this color out so that it's not just sitting. And again, you can just, the side of your brush spreads and doesn't leave paint. And now we're going to go in with the gouache, which I always just add a little drop here. That drop that's already on my palette is already dry and it will just pick off. So I let it dry until I'm finished. And then I'll pick it off the palette the next time I use it. I'm going to mix just a little bit of yellow into it and a little bit of orange. And then I'm stippling again into this area. I'm also going to go a little bit down here. A little more orange, I think, in there. notice there's just a little bit of that brown mixture got mixed in with this now too, and that's okay. For me, the more the merrier. And now I'm going to do just a little bit of this with a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to highlight some of the petals. I need a little more water. This is going to absorb into the paper eventually, so. And I'm going to wash all of the green off of there. I'm not real careful with mixing colors because I don't mind when they're mixed and when the painting's not perfect. I actually prefer it to not be perfect. Just my style. And then I'm just going to add some little bit of that yellow right in on top of the gouache. And that just helps to highlight and brighten it a little bit. Just a little bit more texture in some of these leaves, or a little bit more depth, I should say. I'm going to add more yellow into that because I added too much blue before. That's better. My trick to getting the fine lines with this brush is to slowly lower your hand. Like when I'm doing a signature, I go back and forth until my brush hits the paper, and then I can use the palm of my hand to keep my hand steady, and it helps me write and do these fine lines. So if you are having trouble with the thin lines, just slowly lower your hand until your brush hits the paper, and practice on a little scrap first. Now I'm going to go back in and add a few more details to these petals. So I'm just going to use the colors that I already have on my palettes, the brown, the orange. I'm going to mix just a little bit more yellow. Just deepen the shadowed areas. Okay, now that I have the color on my paper, I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm just going to use that color to drag into the petal texture. The small brush does not hold as much water, so I do find myself going back in for more water more often when I paint with this one. Okay, and now I'm completely dry, and I'm going to wash some of that off. I rinse, blot a couple times, and then push up into the petal. And then rinse it again. This is a rinsing process. So if you're getting the paint off your paper and it's still on your brush and you move on to the next petal, you're going to start with the paint. And now I'm going to go in and just darken a little bit more of the lines here. Although my paper is too wet, so let's let that dry. And let's go up here and do the same thing, only not as high up. I'm going to go in with a little bit brighter yellow in here. I'm going to let that soak in, and then I'm going to blot it up. And I think I want to go a little bit browner on the piston seeds as well. I just feel like that's a little bit too bright for my liking. That's soaked in yet? There we go. That might be a little better. Little black in here. Now I'm fading this one out like I did the last one. So I added a little bit of black to the green, and now I'm gonna add another layer of the green and just let that flow. Rinse, and now just use what's on my paper to smooth that out and soften that line. And I want to add just a little bit of teal, just to brighten it up, just a little. And I'm still not too happy with this part. I'm going to add a little more gouache, make it a little oranger. And if you want to just add little few more details, some of the tips of the petals, could add a little more brown. I just added a little more orange to the black, and I'm going to fill in a little bit more here. And I'm pretty happy with how that is. We could spend all day on getting this perfect, but it's watercolor, so it doesn't have to be. And then the last thing I like to do is I like to splatter them. So this one I have big splatters. I used a mop brush with that. See if I can find it here. And another one I used to get the smaller splatters, I just used the number 12 brush that we've been using throughout this lesson. So you can see how much smaller those are. I'm going to use a combination of them again. So this would be a mop brush. It is, yeah, oval mop is what they call it. 3/4 inch is what I have. And I'm going to get some clean water. And I recommend, if you haven't done this before, to practice. I'm going to flip over. I've already flipped this one over as my demo last class. And just mix in the color that you want to splatter with. And then hold your finger out and tap your brush on your finger. If you tap too hard, you're going to get huge puddles. If you've got too much water in your brush, you'll also get really, really big puddles. So test it out and get it the way you want it first. Make sure the color's right. And if you've got too much on or the puddles are too heavy, you can just, with your towel, straight down and straight back up. Do not smear it. And I'm going to go in with just yellow. And what I also like to do with the yellow is make the flower a little more abstract by pulling a little bit of the petals out. So you can do that as much or as little as you want, or not at all. And last color I'm going to go ahead and do is green. And like I did with the petals up there, I'm going to do down here too. It's just spread some of the green out, just to make it a little bit more loose of a painting. And that's that. Now, I'm still not very happy with how bright this is, so I'm going to add a little bit more brown and just kind of do a wash over it. Brown is but through black and orange, and I'm going to do just a little bit of the indigo as well, just to cool it down. Yeah, and I'm just going to, I dipped the tip of my brush into the water, and now I'm blotting it, and now I'm just going to wash. Just put a color wash right over all the orange. And then you can stipple in again to bring some of that texture back if you washed it out. And I'm going to stipple back in a little bit more black too. Okay, and I'm happy with that. So I'm going to put my signature on it. And I always, just my personal preference, I like to use whatever color the background is so that my signature doesn't have to stand out. If somebody likes the painting, they will look for my signature. And I always sign it with my paint brushes. And again, just like I showed you earlier on this scrap piece, if you slowly lower your hand down back and forth until your brush hits the paper, then you have the height and you can go ahead and write. Otherwise, feel free to grab a number 5 or a number 7 pen and use that, as many other artists do. And I'm also traditional. I always sign in the bottom right corner. But I have many that will sign in the middle of the painting or along like a leaf or somewhere else. So I hope you enjoyed this. As I'm sure you know, the more likes and comments on a video, the further it goes. So if you enjoyed this, please help me out and follow me and give this a like and a comment. See you next time.